All right, welcome back to the Transform with Travel podcast, where we talk all things adventure, culture, and personal transformation, and making the world a better place while we explore it. I'm Kelly Tolliday, your trusted travel friend, and happy April 1st. I promise you no April Fool's jokes here today. April is one of my favorite months, not only because it's my favorite weather, but also because it's the start of Earth Day and celebrations, all around the world. So Earth Day is officially on April 22nd, but you bet that I am celebrating all month long. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I've been a volunteer since 2019 for the international organization called Surfrider Foundation, where we are committed to protecting our coastlines, beaches, and waves through grassroots organization, beach cleanups, loads of programs. I love the Surfrider Foundation, and I actually lead their ocean friendly hotels program here in my little slice of South Florida, where we recognize and celebrate hotels that are doing their part to protect the oceans. So, conservation and coastal protection has been near and dear to my heart for over a decade now. And in episode 40, I actually interview the regional manager for Florida and Puerto Rico for the Surfrider Foundation, where we go over how to be an ocean friendly traveler. And I really, really love that conversation with Evan Oriano. I learned so much. And it's just because conservation and coastal protection, as I said, has been near and dear to me, and it's only been amplified through my travels. And I think as well, like as someone who likes to scuba dive and snorkel and surf, you really do see the state of things on a day in, day out basis. And as you travel, you also get to see some pretty eye-opening things. And a lot of times we can be shielded in our little bubble of America. I mean, Florida, not so much because we have the coast right here. We have hurricanes. We really do see what's happening every year. But, you can be shielded by a lot of the effects of climate change. And when you travel to countries that don't necessarily have the infrastructure to just put up another concrete seawall to quote unquote protect the ocean or protect your property from, the effects of climate change, you really do see some pretty eye-opening things. Things that come to mind from my travels in the past are when I was in India. I was in the middle of the desert on a trek. We were sleeping overnight in the desert, in the Jaisalmer desert, and there was a cow that had died, and its carcass, it was basically just like a carcass, and it was bones, and then inside the gut was plastic bags and plastic trash. And going through the streets of India, you see cows everywhere. They're a revered animal, and they're just eating plastic off the streets. And let's say like surfing in Sri Lanka, I remember going surfing and literally paddling through piles of trash, plastic bags. I even one time touched a diaper and I was like, okay, no, I'm out. I'm out of here. And we did lots of beach cleanups in Welagama, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Just as a way to give back. But yeah, it's overwhelming the amount of trash that you see in beaches around the world. Even in our own beach here in Florida, I went for a beach walk with some friends in Deerfield Beach, and we literally could not help ourselves. We asked the lifeguard if he had any trash bags, and we just started picking up. We picked up like 10 pounds of trash in less than a mile. So it's happening here at home too. One time we were in Thailand, we were in Koh Yao Noi, and we motorbiked down to this beach, and literally, I'm not kidding you, the entire beach was covered in mini plastic bottles like you see in hotels, the amenities, and toothbrushes all across the beach. We literally could not sit down at this beach to enjoy it because it was covered in plastic. And then lastly, recently I was snorkeling in the Florida Keys and I saw a sea turtle, and it looked like from far away that it was eating a jellyfish, as they do. That's part of their natural diet. And then as I got closer, it took me a little while to kind of see what it was, but then I realized that it was eating a plastic bag. And this is in our own backyard here in the Florida Keys. So all of that to say, you really do get a sense of what's happening in the world from a climate perspective and from an environment perspective. And we go and spend all this money and all this time to travel and see the world and be in awe and wonder of these natural landscapes, to only be met with plastic covered beaches and cows dying with plastic in its stomach and getting hurt while surfing because there's trash in the ocean. Like, it's not exactly the experience that you were hoping for. In honor of Earth Day coming up, we're hosting our Eco Friendly Destinations series to highlight and celebrate and recognize destinations and tour operators and hotels around the world that really protect its environment, protect its culture. Because that's a really important piece. When you neglect or not disrespect a culture, you're inherently disrespecting the land because oftentimes the indigenous culture and the natural landscape is so intertwined. So, protecting culture is very important, and making a positive impact, or even better, a net zero impact from an ecological standpoint. As a travel advisor, most of my clients come to me because they know that I not only have the inside scoop on totally transformational yet seemingly overwhelming destinations, places like Thailand and India and Sri Lanka, places like Costa Rica and Panama, places like Australia and New Zealand, even though from a cultural perspective it's not too different, but from a planning perspective and a logistics perspective, it's overwhelming to decide where to go and how to do it, quote unquote, right. So they come to me because I know these fairly overwhelming yet totally life-changing destinations very well. But they also come to me because I'm always on the hunt for eco-friendly, sustainable hotels, tours, and partners. So part of my role with Ocean Friendly Hotels program with Surfrider Foundation, totally volunteer, I don't get paid for that, is that I'm looking locally for hotels that are doing an amazing job at protecting the planet, reducing plastic. But I'm also doing that from an international perspective for my own travel advising clients. So my clients know that when they travel with me, that I will do my best to not only create an unforgettable itinerary that's custom made for them, but also they know that they will inadvertently be making a positive impact along the way because of the partners that I'm matching them up with, because I've done that research. So, today's solo episode with me as your trusted travel friend, I'll be discussing my tips on how to be a sustainable traveler, from the destinations you select to the mode of transport you choose to selecting the tour operators, hotels with a more discerning eye. I've got tips, tricks, and maybe a little tough love to help you travel better for the planet and for the people who call it home. All right, let's get started. Okay, so before we start, we need to get clear, make sure we're on the same page. What is sustainable travel? Because, like all products and industries at this stage, there's a massive amount of greenwashing that's happening. And what is greenwashing? Greenwashing is when somebody just stamps a label that they're sustainable, that they're organic, that they're, fill in the blank buzzword without actually having done the due diligence or the certification or having actually done anything, because it can be really easy just to throw a buzzword on something but not actually be at the level that they need to be considered sustainable. So simply put, sustainable travel is about minimizing your negative impact and maximizing your positive one. What does that mean? It means reducing your carbon emissions where possible. It means intentionally selecting destinations that make an effort to give back to its culture and protect the environment, supporting local communities and not exploiting cultures, respecting wildlife and their fragile ecosystems, and preventing your use of single-use plastic, or just plastic altogether if possible. But I have young kids. I know it's a little bit of a pipe dream to think you'll be completely plastic free, but reducing where you can. It's about making choices that help ensure the places that we love don't get loved to death. What does that mean, right? What does that mean for a place to get loved to death? It means when its popularity strains its natural resources, strains its accommodation resources for locals. It means that we're over consuming in these destinations that don't have the infrastructure to support that. Like we're seeing in places like Bali and Koh Samui, they've been dubbed to have a quote unquote plastic apocalypse, where beaches are just literally covered from head to toe in plastic. And not necessarily the country's fault. A lot of times currents from faraway countries bring patches and patches of plastic, but that means like what you do in Sri Lanka has an effect on what happens in Indonesia. What you do in Australia has an effect on what happens in Antarctica and New Zealand. So really thinking like from a global network perspective. Sustainable travel means thinking of it like traveling with intention, with a conscious, with mindfulness, and also with your reusable water bottle, of course. We'll talk a lot about that. So, for this conversation, we're going to be using the why, where, when, how, and what framework to guide this conversation. So, let's start with our why. Why are you traveling? Selecting your destination is usually the obvious first step when planning a trip, but I always encourage my clients to think about their why. Why do you want to travel in the first place? What are you seeking to feel, to experience, to learn on your travels? What is your intention for this trip? One time I asked a client on our first call together, our consultation call, like, what's your intention for this? And she was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I didn't like prepare to go this deep. But I think it's really important because oftentimes we do overlook this super basic yet super important question. Why? And when we drill down what we really want out of our future vacation or trip, we can get more clear on which destination actually makes the most sense for us instead of just following the trends of the latest viral destination. I can definitely say that I've been guilty. I've fallen prey to seeing a beautifully executed Instagram reel with inspiring music in the background of just 2-second clips of a destination and being like, yep, I need to go there. But if I actually drill down like what I need from my next trip, that destination probably doesn't match up. And I'm letting the viral nature of Instagram kind of dictate where I'm going to go. And that's where we see places that we love getting loved to death because there's no intentionality behind where we're going and why. The next question after why is where, like we mentioned. Usually it's the where first. Let's start with why and then we go where. When we make a mindful, intentional choice, we likely won't follow the crowd. And following the crowds is quite literally causing overcrowding in destinations that are crumbling over its own popularity. For example, somewhere like Bali. I know I've mentioned it before and we love Bali. I love Bali. I'm not saying don't go there. But there are suburbs, there are neighborhoods of Bali that are like just totally, totally jam packed with businesses, with travelers. I mean, it can literally take an hour to get a mile down the road because there's so many motorbikes blocking the path. So I have clients that come to me and say, I really want to go to Bali and I want to experience, the famous beach clubs. And I'm like, cool, let's do 2 days near the beach clubs. And then I'm going to take you to somewhere that you would have never heard before. And it's going to be your favorite part of the trip. I promise. And so it's like, when we think about the example of Bali, okay, Seminyak, Kuta, Canggu, they have all of the really popular, famous beach clubs. If you really want to experience that, let's spend 2 nights there. And then I'm going to take you over to the northwestern side, maybe perhaps in Balian, or the east side of the island in Ahmed, or jump to a different island altogether and get a different taste. There's a way to still incorporate some of the hot spots of travel, but being able to see a different side of the island, support a different local economy that might not be overrun by big box chain hotels and operators and all that. Also, doing some basic research as to the state of the country or destination before making your decision. So it might sway your choice to know that, you know, in the summer last year, locals in Barcelona and in Venice and in other destinations around the Mediterranean were literally flinging water balloons at cruise guests as they were getting off the cruise ship. That's probably not the vibe that you're going for when you're trying to explore a new country. So, knowing about these things ahead of time might actually sway your decision about what you're going to do. And also, doing research on the other side is what destinations are doing a really good job at protecting their environments, their wildlife, their cultures. Do they have regulations on how many people can actually enter a certain national park? Do they have regulations on how many people can experience, let's say Machu Picchu, there's permits to get in there. Do they have some sort of sustainability tax or like the part of their visa that you pay for? Does that go to some sort of regenerative part of their country? Actively choosing to support those types of countries. Places like Panama, Costa Rica, Galapagos, Peru, Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, just to name a few. So, doing just like one step further, like what will my economic dollar actually support? What is the government actually doing to protect its people and protect the environment? And you're listening to this episode right now. If you're like, oh my God, Kelly, that's just so much extra work. If you're listening to this episode right now, you are up for the challenge. I know you saw the title of this episode and you were like, yes, I want to be a sustainable traveler. So don't let these little few extra steps in your planning derail you from going full send in your sustainable travel journey. And also, I'm here to support you to help make those decisions because I already know a lot of the answers to these questions. So we talked about why, we talked about where, now we're going to talk about when. We, as travel advisors, talk a lot about traveling in off seasons if possible. Now, I'm a mom to two young girls. I understand the limitations of school breaks and tight spring breaks and 2 months for summer. And I've got 5 days for Thanksgiving. It's not always that easy to just travel during off season. So I know, I empathize, and I understand. If you do have the ability to take a trip during the off seasons or shoulder seasons or even the winter is a beautiful time to experience so many destinations. But traveling in those off seasons not only saves you a bit of money and gives you more availability at places that might have otherwise priced you out in the summer, but it also helps avoid overpopulating and overstraining resources. It helps keep rent in the hands of locals who oftentimes have to leave during peak seasons because they can't afford their own rent. Their landlords just price it up in the summer because they can. I know I was looking at Uruguay in January, and a normal $5,000 per month Airbnb jumped to $20,000 in January, which is just wild to me. When you arrive at a destination and it's the peak season of that destination, you are one of the many people that are putting a strain on the locals' resources and on the country's resources that they might not be able to keep up with. So just being intentional about when you're visiting these places as well. So, why, where, when? Now we're going to talk about the how. How are you traveling from one place to the next? Obviously, if you're traveling from the US to Thailand or Australia or Panama, you got to take a flight. I totally understand that. I'm not going to say like start hitchhiking your way across the Americas, which does sound kind of cool. But not all of us have a year at a time to travel. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? Air travel. Planes are just not great for the environment. I don't think that needs to be a political conversation. I think that's just facts. We know that planes are not great for the environment, but that doesn't mean you need to swear off flying forever. Here are some things that you can do. When you are taking a flight from one country to the next, or even domestically, try to fly direct wherever possible. Sometimes that means that your flight will be more expensive. And sometimes that means you might have to drive 2 hours north to get to an international airport to be able to fly direct. But as many times that you have to stop over, let's say you have one layover or two layovers, takeoff and landing burn the most fuel. So if you can avoid having layovers where possible, then you're avoiding burning up more and more fuel that it's going to take to do the takeoff and the landing. You can also choose airlines with strong sustainability commitments. And again, this goes back to the greenwashing and using all the buzzwords, like actually understanding what are the airlines doing from a sustainability perspective. Do they have a commitment to reach a certain level of carbon offset or net zero? I mean, I don't think you're ever going to get net zero with planes, but do they actually have a commitment that's public on their website? Again, this is where me as a travel advisor who specializes in sustainable travel can come in handy. The next thing is offsetting your carbon footprint. So when you're checking out of your flight, like when you're booking your flight, oftentimes there's a little tick that says, hey, tick here if you want to offset your carbon footprint. And you're like, does this actually help? Is this $5 actually doing something? Yes, it actually is. Do I think it should be on the airline to be doing this for you? Of course, that's another conversation. But if it's only a couple extra dollars, please do it. It helps. I know a lot of tour operators offer this. A lot of my partners already include that in their costs. They're like, this is something we just do. Especially a lot of my partners in the national parks, my partners down in Panama, they already include that in their price. It's just like a feel good factor for you to know that you're supporting somewhere that does that. So choosing operators that do that already, or choosing to offset your carbon footprint by paying a little bit extra money to be able to do that. Then what's really fun, this is my favorite part of this conversation, talking about transportation, is getting creative, right? Okay, maybe you have to take your transatlantic flight from the US to Europe, or perhaps obviously you have to fly from the US to Australia. But what can you do domestically in between? take the train, the bullet train, take a ferry, take a bus. I know you can take a domestic flight from one island to the next. Like, can you take a speed ferry? Can you take a bus? I know through India, like, and Sri Lanka, the buses are kind of it's a cultural experience. It's crazy and it's nuts, but it's kind of one of those experiences that you have to have. And then taking it a little bit step further, like, yeah, it might cost a little bit more money, but could you take a sailboat? Could you take a group sailboat or perhaps a private sailboat from one island to the next when you're in Croatia? My friend Jen Karam, she was on the podcast in February. She owns Anchor Croatia, and they specialize in sailing yacht rentals across Croatia. And my clients are actually traveling from Split through the different islands to get to Hvar. So it's kind of a cool way to see a country. It's a slower way, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But the last thing I'll leave you with is, I know I mentioned taking a train. Rail travel, train travel is taking off. It is a huge trend right now across Europe, across South America, across Australia. There are some impeccable luxury trains that you can take that blend culture, that blend high-end luxury food and cuisine, and also getting from one point to the next without having to take a plane. If you're looking more on a budget, there's tons of budget trains out there. And it's just, for me, I remember some of my favorite memories were sitting on the Eurail, just watching the countryside go by and seeing the changes from the city to the outer city to the country to the full blown nature. It's just one of those things that I think you really get a sense of the country and like you're part of that culture while you're on the train. I know there are some destinations where your train trip is a part of the journey. Like it's an excursion in and of itself. I know from Bergen to Oslo or Oslo to Bergen in Norway, it's one of the most spectacular views like from a train that you'll ever get. I know from Tokyo out to Kyoto or Hakone, you get to see Mount Fuji from the train if you're on the right side of the train. So it's like those types of things, it's part of the trip itself. And so and you're also becoming a more sustainable traveler that way. So I mentioned slower travel. I mentioned if you have a little bit of time to be able to take the train or take a ferry or a sailboat, something like that. If you really want to flex your eco-friendly muscles, try slow travel, which means spending more time in one place instead of hopping from city to city. It's better for the planet and it's better for your sanity. When you travel at a slower pace, you get to know the destination and all of its nuances, all of its quirks. You get to make friends with the local barista and you understand how the culture operates instead of just hopping from one highlights tour of each city and just doing, okay, I saw this and then I saw that and now it's time to leave. And you're going to spend most of your time in the airport. Oh my gosh, airports are not like you have to oftentimes take like 30, 40 minutes to an hour to get to the airport and you have to get there 2 or 3 hours before now. So it's like you're spending your entire day traveling in an airport when you could just decide, I've got 2 weeks and I'm going to do two places really well. I've got 1 week and I'm just going to hole up in this amazing private villa or this amazing hotel and really get to know my surroundings really well. I think it's one of my greatest joys is actually going back to destinations that I know really, really well because you make friends and you understand the culture and you also cut back on the amount of transportation that you need to take and not flying from place to place every 3 days. So you make a bigger economic impact at a local level. You're more likely to support small businesses than just going with the super convenient big commercial chain businesses. And you're also, like I mentioned, cutting back on your transportation and the amount of flights that you're taking from an ecological impact. All right, so we did the why, the where, the when, the how. Now we're getting into the what. This is the nitty gritty details. The hotels to pick, the businesses to support, what to pack, the excursions to avoid, all of it. Once you arrive to your destination, the choices that you make a huge difference. So here are some of my top tips on how to, from a local level, be a sustainability superstar. And this might be a choice that you're making before your trip because the first one is your accommodation, but staying at eco-friendly accommodations, staying at boutique family run locations and accommodations, choosing a hotel that's part of a group that is known for its sustainability, or they only select hotels to join their group because they have certain policies. So I think of a hotel property group in Central America called the Cayuga properties. And all of their properties are impeccably sustainable and also luxury. So you don't have to sacrifice luxury to be able to be eco-friendly. Think hotels with solar power, with water conservation policies, with rainwater, like reusing rainwater, local employment initiatives, organic food on site. Think smaller, more boutique accommodations or immersive culturally. So thinking like a temple stay in Japan where your funds for that night are going to restoring part of the temple. Not only do you get such a unique experience, but you also get to feel what it is like to be a part of that culture, from the meditations in the morning and eating on the floor, like in the classic, Japanese way. And just like, how cool. You're going to remember that temple stay in Japan over any other place that you've stayed before because of the experience that's attached to it. And then lastly, on the eco-friendly accommodations, because I lead the Ocean Friendly Hotels program here in South Florida, things to think about is, and it's a little bit tricky because you might not know from a traveler's perspective what to look out for, that they might not even show it on their website, but you can ask the hotel, you can email them. Do they offer little mini bottles of amenities, little plastic bottles, like to every traveler? Do they throw them out afterwards? Or do they offer the reusable pumps in the showers? So they're not churning through all these little mini bottles of plastics like I saw covering and littering an entire beach in Thailand. So it's like something small like that makes a big difference in supporting. Or if you happen to go to a hotel and you notice that they are doing eco-friendly, ocean-friendly practices, going up to the concierge, being like, hey, I noticed that you guys have a really great water conservation policy where you ask guests to reuse their towels and not get their sheets cleaned every single night, or not having housekeeping every single day. I noticed that you have the reusable pumps, the reusable bottles in the showers, instead of the mini bottles of plastic. Hey, I really like that. And I'm going to come back to this hotel because of that. Letting them know that they're doing a great job, because it's not always the most profitable approach from the short term for hotels to make these changes. And they're doing it for the planet. So giving them some positive reinforcement that they will get your business again and you will refer them to other travelers because of that. So the next one is supporting local businesses. Skip the chain restaurants, shop at local markets, be open to walking into a mom and pop restaurant that might not be on Google Maps. It might not be on TripAdvisor. You don't need to hit the top restaurants, the, quote unquote top restaurants. So as told by the influencer of the day, to get a real taste of the local flavor. You being okay with just like stopping into a smoothie shop and seeing what happens. Supporting these local businesses and restaurants goes such a long way over only eating on the cruise, or only eating in the hotel restaurant, or only eating at places that you've seen before at home. Like using your economic dollar in a really wise way to support these communities. The next one is your tours and activities. So finding operators, tour operators, local businesses who have a conservation or a regenerative policy in place already. Where are they taking you to? Are they giving back to these local communities that you're touring through? What's their give back program? Or on the flip side of that, you can find sustainable, eco-friendly activities in and of itself. Join a local beach cleanup. I know Spindrift, shout out to my favorite friends at Spindrift in Welagama in Sri Lanka. They did a weekly community beach cleanup, and my husband and I participated in that. When we were in Indonesia in the Gili Islands, our local dive operator who we were diving with for those few weeks, they did a weekly dive off the pier where you had a giant bag under the water and you worked with a little team, and they gave you a BCD and a tank and all the things to go under the water in the pier and pick up all of the trash, a lot of fishing nets, a lot of fishing lines, and we would pick up hundreds of pounds of trash under the water. That was 10 years ago, and I literally got goosebumps. Like, I remember that so deeply. And afterwards, we were all high-fiving and we had beers after, and everyone had such a good time. Like, you can have the most fun doing the most beneficial activities that might not be on the top 10 things to do in Florence, right? Support your local tour operators, support coral restoration projects, beach cleanups, dive cleanups, supporting local communities by going into a neighborhood that might not be as well loved as it should be, and doing a walking tour there. That could be a great way. And then the last piece of this is respecting the culture. So I don't think you can talk about sustainability and the environment without also talking about local culture, especially as I mentioned before, with this innate connection of indigenous culture, indigenous ceremony, indigenous practices with the environment and with the earth. Oftentimes, more often than not, I don't think I can even think of an indigenous culture that I know of that doesn't revolve around its respect for the earth. So, when you go to these new destinations, perhaps doing some sort of indigenous experience that is well done and not exploitative, like actually giving back to these communities and not just exploiting these communities, doing some sort of indigenous immersion or spending the night out in an indigenous community. I know there's amazing operators out in the world that do this really, really well. Respecting the culture by learning a few phrases, following local customs, talking to your local taxi driver. Like, you can't talk about sustainable travel without it also becoming a part of a conversation about how we protect the local culture as well. And also, pro tip, leave no trace. Whether you're hiking, visiting beaches, or exploring a city, pick up after yourself. And bonus points if you pick up extra trash. I always bring extra trash bags with me when I go to the beach in Costa Rica, and I'll just clean up while I'm there. Costa Rica is an impeccably clean country, but without fail, there's always, the random bits and bobs on the beach that you can clean up, and I always bring bags with me. And now my kids get involved, and it's become a thing that we do together. The next part of this is a little bit of a trickier conversation because these are activities that clients want to experience, travelers want to experience around the world. And this is engaging in ethical wildlife tourism. And it's a bit tricky. I've had clients come to me going to Thailand and say, I really want to ride an elephant. And I have to have a tricky conversation, a more difficult conversation with the reasons why I personally will not book that as an advisor for travelers. And then I give resources and podcast episodes and articles as to the reason why. And the main thing is your selfie as a traveler, your selfie is not worth the suffering of animals. And no matter whether it says ethical or sustainable or sanctuary or any of those words, if you are close enough to engage with, to touch, to feed an animal, the animal is likely not, quote unquote, enjoying this. It is likely not ethical. One of the biggest sustainability pitfalls that travelers fall into is unethical animal tourism. And this is not to say that travelers go out with malice and they're just like, I don't care about the animal, I just want the experience. Most of us really care about these animals, and that's why we want to have these experiences. So that's why this is kind of a controversial, tricky conversation to have. We unknowingly fall into unethical animal tourism. And even the term animal tourism doesn't really sit well with me. So as a traveler, I know you really got to sit with the why. Why do we want to have this experience with this elephant? Is it really to get that picture, or can we observe from a little bit more of a respectful distance and still be close enough to these animals without really disrupting their flow of their life? So if you can, saying no to elephant rides, camel rides, and any sort of animal ride, dolphin shows, swimming with dolphins, any attraction where animals are performing for tourists. If you can touch or interact with an animal, it likely isn't ethical. And really choosing conservation projects to visit rather than looking at it's really tricky to understand whether something truly is a sanctuary or not, because again, depending on which country you're in, anywhere can be a sanctuary. So doing a lot of research behind what is actually a sanctuary, what's a conservation project, what is just essentially a zoo, and observing the wildlife from a respectful distance. You don't need that selfie with that monkey in Indonesia. Trust me, you're more likely to get rabies than you are likely to get a good picture. So just really, really thinking deep and feeling deeply about what kind of experience is beneficial for these animals and what kind of experience is detrimental for these animals. Now we're going to talk about packing. We've talked about a lot today, so stay with me, stick with me here. We're going to talk about packing for a sustainable trip. So number one is bringing your reusable water bottle with you. Bonus points if it's one of those water bottles that has a filter so you can literally drink from anywhere. I do understand when you are traveling with kids, especially like I know when I was in Thailand, I wasn't going to risk like, is my filter going to work or not? So what we would do, we would have everyone had their big reusable water bottles. We would go to the 7-Eleven. and we would get the giant, like 5-gallon water bottle that we would leave in our hotel room and fill up our water bottles from there. So instead of getting a bunch of little mini, like individual water bottles, we would get giant ones and then we would fill up. So while, yes, we were still using plastic, we were reducing a lot less than if we were to just get a plastic water bottle every single time. We always left the hotel plastic water bottles that they would give to us in the hotel rooms. We would leave that and not touch it and tell them, please reuse it. We didn't touch it. But oftentimes in places like Asia, they actually give you glass ones, which are great. You can pack your reusable bags for shopping, for souvenirs, and packing your reusable utensils. So when you're traveling, you're often eating out and takeaway a lot, taking food away a lot, and they'll give you the plastic cutlery. So if you have your own reusable cutlery, you don't need to take the plastic with you. Packing reef safe sunscreen, because coral reefs, we don't need any more problems with our coral reefs. They're so important. And we need to make sure that we're packing reef safe sunscreen. I know in Hawaii, they don't even sell sunscreen that's not reef safe anymore. So just do your research as to your favorite brands that have reef safe options and choosing a sunscreen that will protect the coral reefs that you are going and spending a lot of money to go see. Next thing you can pack is solid toiletries. So think like shampoo bars and conditioner bars and body bars and facial soap bars. Even they have little, they look like mints, but it's actually toothpaste, and you just pop the little mint toothpaste thing in your mouth and then start brushing, and it turns into toothpaste. You don't have to have the plastic tube for your toothpaste anymore. And you can get bamboo toothbrush. Like there's so many different reusable products that you can get, but saying no to plastic waste by starting with your solid toiletries is a great way to be able to do that. All up, the less waste that you generate on the road, the better. Your suitcase should not look like a landfill when you unpack. And the less that you pack, the less weight is on the plane, and then the less fuel that is needed to get you from point A to point B. So it's massive flex all around. And then the last thing here that I'm going to leave you with, and this is more of a mindset piece than anything else. Be okay with saying no to plastic when you're out. I know it can feel uncomfortable when somebody offers you a plastic bag at the store, or they offer you a container of plastic, or they offer you a plastic water bottle when you're in your taxi in the car. Some countries just don't quite understand saying no to plastic yet, especially when the delicate balance of profit margin comes into play, because it's a lot less expensive to have plastic than have anything reusable. And they're just trying to make ends meet in certain countries around the world. So be okay with saying no to plastic bags, plastic water bottles, all those things. Be firm, but be polite. If they're curious about your choice, you can explain it, but you don't have to get on a soapbox. A lot of countries, like I said, are just trying to survive each day. And be mindful of your own privilege in this. Do your best to minimize your impact without getting too preachy about it, if you know what I mean. So, closing thoughts, wrapping it all up. We talked about why. Why are we traveling? To dictate the where. Where are we going to go? And where is doing a really great job at protecting its environment and its culture. When we travel plays a big role of how sustainable we're being as travelers. How we're traveling, planes, trains, automobiles, all the things. And then the what. What are we packing? What tours are we taking? What animal encounters are we choosing to say yes or no to? These are all micro decisions that make a big impact. And the good news is you don't have to be perfect to be a sustainable traveler. Small changes add up. And whether it's choosing a more eco-friendly hotel, or saying no to a plastic bag, or spending your money where it counts, every step towards sustainability matters. And demanding from large corporations to do better makes more of a global impact than you know. Companies, I promise you this, companies pay attention to where you spend your money. And more importantly, they pay attention to where you don't spend your money. So if there's one thing that you can take away from today's episode, apart from being glued to your reusable water bottle while you're traveling, is to be super intentional and mindful about which companies you choose on your travels. Airlines, hotels, tour operators, even what products to buy for your trips, like clothing and tech, it makes a huge difference. And if you are overwhelmed by all of this new information, like, oh my God, I've never traveled like this before, this is too much, that's where I come in. I am here to help you make those choices because I have relationships with people around the world that are already doing this work in amazing ways. And travel changes us and leaves us with a lifetime of memories. So we need to make sure that we're doing our part to protect this beautiful planet that we love so, so much. so that we have many years to come of exploring these raw, untouched, beautiful destinations, and that our kids and our grandkids and generations to come also have that opportunity. So I want to hear from you. What is one sustainable swap that you're going to make on your next trip? I'd love to know. Please email me directly at kelly@transformwithtravel.co. I want to hear what made the biggest impact for you. What are you going to change for your next trip? If you have a trip coming up or are dreaming of a future trip, please reach out to me. Same email, kelly@transformwithtravel.co. I'm here to support you in experiencing these transformational destinations around the world and doing it in a way that leaves the world a better place as you travel. If you love this episode, please leave a review and stay tuned for the next few weeks. We're highlighting incredible destinations around the world. You'll get all the ins and outs of how to travel to some of the most far-flung destinations to some of the more localized destinations. And I'm really excited for you to learn from these experts that are coming up in the next few weeks. I'll see you on the other side. Thanks for tuning in to the Transform with Travel podcast. If you have a friend or a loved one you were thinking of during this episode, spread a little love and share this episode with them, someone who could use a little inspiration. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe to the podcast as well. To learn more about us, head to www.transformwithtravel.co, and I'll see you on the next episode. This is your reminder to keep on exploring.